Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for taking the time today. I am Eric Alexander. I know most of you. If not, I just want to thank you again for joining one of our many BEI programs, whether you're here local within our system in our hospital or you're joining us regionally or even nationally or beyond. So it's great to have everyone here. And a lot of activities going on. I'm really excited about what we have today, which is the second in our two-part series led by our lead on our education technology expert, Narath Carlile, who has been a partner in the BEI for years now and really helped us advance the real important world of education technology into useful endpoints, useful metrics, novel ways to make our education both better, more efficient, kind of fun for the learner and the teacher. There's a lot there. So Narath, over to you.
So welcome, everyone. As Eric had said, this is the second in the Education Innovation Series. The last discussion, we really focused sort of on collaborative knowledge generation using and lessons learned from our wiki system, the Brigapedia. We'll mention it briefly here because they are closely related to helping departments and residencies sparkle. But today I've got new material that we're going to be covering. So in brief, the three goals I want to introduce you to are to introduce you to the Sparkle app, why and how it was developed. I wanted to share with you lessons that we've learned in using it with some of these highly effective residencies and departments within the Brigham. And I wanted to share with you how you could use it yourself for your department if you're here within our organization, or approaches that you can use in your clinical education organization if you're outside. Stated as learning objectives, if I've succeeded, at the end of today, you'll be able to describe how you could use the Sparkle app or things like it to help your clinical educators and learners to keep up to date on clinical conferences, tools, and then all the educational treasures available within your institution. You'd be able to describe how the app was developed and the benefits of this approach within healthcare innovation. And you should also be able to plan how you and your department could apply lessons learned from the Sparkle approach to improve the clinical learning environment. By way of disclosures, as Eric had mentioned, I'm the informatics lead for this project here at the Educational Institute. But my goal today is not to pitch you on the Sparkle app, right? It's to share with you lessons, not only in how we tried to solve the problem we were facing and how it was developed, but also to share with you what we've learned in using it with some phenomenal programs. It's, of course, the work of a tremendous team, and I'm so grateful to our BI team, to our design, development, and system administrators, and then to all the institutional support that we received. I'm going to start briefly based on what is informatics. I'm the lead clinical health informaticist for the Educational Institute. What does that mean? And why is it relevant to what I'm going to talk to you about today? It's relevant, I think, because I'm hoping that it'll share with you a little bit about why did we choose this approach? How did we have experience doing that? And then what's the future potential for this and other innovations in healthcare? And what could you expect from working with informaticists? Right? I think it'll help you understand a little bit about where we're going with this, with the Sparkle tool and the system around it. And also a little bit about the depth of why we think it's well suited to adapting to learning within the clinical health environment. Unfortunately, many people not only don't know what informatics is, but people in informatics themselves, I think, hold a view of informatics which is far too limited. And many people think about it as the use of computers or technology inside healthcare. And Enrico Carrera has this to say about that. Informatics is as much about computers as cardiology is about stethoscopes, right? So imagine if the specialty of cardiology felt that the major utility of their specialty was just to use the stethoscopes. So in informatics, technology is a tool that we use, sure, but its scope is much bigger. And so what is that scope? The specialty of health informatics is focused on the system science of healthcare, right? It's designed to help us understand and then to work on the systems within healthcare, right? It's a really broad scope. This is what drew me to work on it. I'm really interested in systems of care, not just here, but abroad as well. And then I think that we get to use powerful technologies, but it's not all that there is to it. Of course, the world is being transformed. In the last 40 to 50 years, healthcare and the practice of healthcare has been radically changed by informatics, right? And that, I think, is why the specialty sort of coalesced into this board certification in 2015. But it's only going to keep rapidly accelerating. And the big one that's coming in the next 10 to 20 years that's also going to transform education is AI. So I can't mention informatics in a lecture and not mention AI. And of course, anytime you mention AI, you have to bring up a slide about ChatGPT. So here's a conversation I had with ChatGPT asking them what medical resident physicians need to know about AI. And it came back with an impressive response that was very readable, but it was highly superficial. And the truth is that it was best with interpretation. I do think that we're going to see a lot of useful applications rapidly applied within specific specialties, such as pathology, radiology, and very likely dermatology, where it'll be very useful. But in other areas, it's going to need very thoughtful applications because its limitations and the perverse incentives within our existing healthcare systems could make the risks of AI much greater than its potential benefits in some areas. I'm really hoping that you'll have within your organization or people you can talk to in informatics who can help you to understand this and help you think through it. So what does it exactly mean to say it's the system science of healthcare? Where is the system science, right? And the system science is largely being led outside the organization, a lot of it coming from the social sciences and a lot of it from economics. And organizations like here, the department at MIT, and then the one that had been led by Donnell Meadows, who started here at MIT and then moved to Dartmouth, has really been leading the system science, both in systems thinking and in systems dynamics and modeling. And we've learned a lot from these approaches that I think we can apply to healthcare. I'm going to give you a brief introduction to it, just so you have a framework for thinking about our Sparkle app together, and you can both ask me questions about it, and then also, I think more broadly about how you might apply these frameworks in your own institution. So when we think in systems, right, I think people have an intuitive sense for that, and people naturally think about, oh, there's all this stuff. There are people, there are tools that we can use. Those are the elements of it. People also sort of naturally think about what's the function of it? What's the purpose of the BEI, for example, which has stuff and people. And then there's an intended purpose for many things. A lot of systems thinking and training is really centered around not just understanding what the intended purpose of it is, which many people consider as the function, but in systems thinking, it's really what is the actual behavior exhibited over time. Lachlan Farr has presented the best question around the actual behavior of healthcare over time, for example, most recently when he asked a question about a family member who'd experienced care. And he said, imagine if the system only cared about money, what would have been different about their care, right? That's a sort of shocking, deep question I think we can all ask, especially in the US healthcare system, to help us understand what's the actual behavior, not the intended behavior of care over time. The final one is interconnections, which is often invisible to most people, but informaticists think a lot about this. And the Sparkle app sort of fits very neatly there. When you do a lot of systems dynamics and a lot of systems modeling, the elements and the function are important, but the major determinant of the behavior of systems is actually with the way those parts are connected. Right. So an example within the Educational Institute is we spend all this money getting these amazing systems like easy full text access to journals. But the vast majority of people don't understand those. There's no connection there, right? And so the purpose within the system is radically changed by that. It's not just important to think about how the systems are built, but also important for us to understand systems. The main goal being that we are able to intervene and help to improve the systems to achieve the outcomes we want. As we think about these, we often think about them in these three elements. So the events are the easy things to see. What's happening to my patient? What's happening within our organization? The behavior is the trends over time that we're seeing, not just the singular events. We're seeing there's a trend towards something. This is where the machine learning, the stuff that we call AI, is really got its real strengths, right? So it's continuously observing behavior and then making statistical predictions about those things. There's an underlying structure that's much deeper than that. And that's in medicine, we'd call the physiology of the individual, but in organizations, it's going to be the structure that we see. And then there's one layer I'll get to next. In systems whereas we've done lots of systems dynamics modeling, it's been very clear that things that have only a behavioral model, and we've seen this a lot in economic systems, are often really good at predicting near-term performance. What's going to happen in the next day or a few days? We see this with weather modeling, we see this with economics modeling, right? These are the machine learning predictive models that we see, but they're really bad at long-term performance, right? What's going to happen to me 20 years from now? What's going to happen to our organization these many years? What's happened to the economy? And they're really terrible at telling you how to change the performance of the economy. And that's going to be the major limitation of the AI systems that we're seeing today, unless they develop some kind of structural knowledge. So as you're thinking about things in a systems thinking way, you can use this as a tool to guide your thinking. There's the events that we react to, they're the patterns or trends, which are the behaviors over time that we work to anticipate. And then you trying to understand all the time these underlying structures, the thing that scientific thinking has helped us understand the most of. Whenever you're working inside people-based systems, as we are within the Sparkle system, as we try to work with departments to help improve the learning environment, it also matters that you have some awareness of the mental models. What are the things that people believe about the system, right, that perpetuate these structures or make things that are valuable not be utilized, right? And these are the things related a lot to trust and relationship. So, for example, if you're part of a system in which you feel that your only role is to be judged, right, and not to be helped to grow, you may take on a tool like Sparkle in a very different way. So being aware of those really matters. Of course, one of the big things that everybody cares about, and certainly something one of our topics today, is technology and innovation in healthcare. And for that, we just quickly have to, talk about the elephant in the room, which is really that most innovation projects fail. Why should we bring up this rough topic now? The reason is because we chose a particular approach to try to address this. The news is actually even worse, which is that most projects fail. According to the Project Management Institute, which has studied projects across international settings, thousands of them, 80% of projects will fail to achieve the benefits that they promised, right? Many of them succeed in getting delivered, but many of the promised benefits are not realized. And Enrico Coera, who's a wonderful informaticist down in Australia, has a simple definition for why this is true for most of the projects. And that's because of this difference between the work as imagined in the comfortable conference room, right, and the work is done. And medicine and healthcare is particularly complicated, right? So this is where the idea of the EHR gets a little complicated. We're still struggling to achieve some of the benefits that we previously had with our prior EMR. And then this is also where the apps start to get a little complicated and why we see many things fail. So why do organizations, and this may be happening in your department as you try to introduce a new innovation, why do they continue to persist in this? And that's largely because we don't like uncertainty. You don't want to pay lots of money for a project in which you're not sure of the outcome. And you want to see a graph like this, which is why the head of the hospital or your boss demands sort of this big Gantt chart. I want to see how your technical risk goes down and down and down. The reason that that's pretty rational is because the costs of change go up and up and up, right? The further down you are in the system, the costs of changing any of those, introducing errors, goes up. For most innovation projects, unfortunately, the graph looks like this, right? And that's because, yeah, there are technical challenges that you're trying to address, and those address feasibility risks. But the desirability, will people actually use it? And then the viability, can you deliver it for less of the cost that people are willing to pay you for it? Even for internal projects like our Sparkle system, matter a lot. And so what's the other approach? Some colleagues, Brad Crotty and Malik Samai, and I have written about the uses of agile methodologies to help develop projects that are far more likely to be successful, even though they may be different than the project you initially conceived of. And this can apply both for healthcare strategy and leadership as well as technical projects. And it's the approach that we used for Sparkle. This is a hill chart from the product Basecamp, and I think it captures really what we're doing and where we are with Sparkle. Most projects are on this area of the figuring things out part, right? And many people and organizational leaders want you to be on the making it happen side only, without having paid for the time that it takes to figure things out. With Sparkle, and we'll talk about the approach that we try to get as quickly as possible to a version of the hill and then start executing. And now we've gotten to the next level of that version. And I do think that we have something that we can easily help most departments help to realize some significant value. That is, for part of where we are, we're helping to make it happen. And then for one big new part, the learning journeys, we're still figuring things out. This happens most easily within institutions and organizations that has something of an innovation architecture. And for those within the institution, I wanted to make sure you had knowledge of these aspects of it so you could take advantage of it. And for those outside, I'd encourage you to look for your versions of these inside your organization. So in this innovation architecture, you need some way, there's going to be visionary leadership, the people who will create the space and the budget for discovery and iteration that will help you get up that hill, even with your good idea, right? You need a space for that to happen, and you need the ability to do some visioning to see that you can overcome some uncertainty with something of value. The other space that you need is really an innovation catalyst. And this is somebody who will lower the barriers for you for innovation and learning within your organization. Within healthcare institutions and organizations, developing enterprise-level applications is both risky and costly, right? So you need somebody who's helped to lower those barriers And we've got this in the iHub, right? So the Innovation Hub, and they've created this pathway, the DIG pathway, that let us get through the regulatory compliance and security hurdles. It still took some time. Eric will attest to that, but it was much lower than it could be, and it made it possible. The other key element for you to think about with an agile development methodology is really around the feedback cycle. And this is the thing I'd encourage you for all of your projects to get to as quickly as possible. And that's to be getting actual feedback from real users. We'll talk a little bit about the phased approach that we used in the Sparkle application. So what exactly was the problem that we were trying to solve with Sparkle? And then and we'll learn later sort of what are the problems that people are actually using it to help us solve as well. One of the roles of the Educational Institute is to try to make sure that we find resources and then make them available across the institution. This is happening not just within the Educational Institute, where we're spending hundreds of thousands, even, and some, I'm sure, millions of dollars, as well as departments, as well as the organization as a whole, is collecting all these treasures, right? But it's not the experience of people of just coming to a treasure chest and having access to it. We're just throwing lots and lots of things at people. The default way that we're sharing things with people are massive orientation packets, right? Or they're getting tons and tons of emails. And instead of them feeling like they've got this personalized learning journey, they've got these tons of different maps that all seem to be conflicting that they're having to figure out how to use. This creates a huge tangled mess of an experience, even as you try to struggle to work across multiple settings with multiple different team members, all having different experiences. And oh yes, we've got a few secret passcodes that you need to remember in order to access some of the systems. So while it seems like there's lots of amazing light out there, it's distributed far and wide and they're hard to understand. And it's certainly not the same experience as having sort of a collected treasure of the most important things for you. And that, in a nutshell, was sort of the problem that we were trying to tackle. One of the dream and visionary projects, I think, for us was this idea that everybody who joins the Brigham would have a unique learning and development journey, that they would feel that they would have a sense of trust, and then there'd be demonstrated ways that they could do that. This, we think, would be something that would help them maximize their potential for clinical learning and professional development. And we think that this needs to happen not just there, but within a learning health system infrastructure. I'd like everyone to sort of pause briefly and think about your own institution and your own sort of journey. And did you feel that you were part of like a learning health system infrastructure? Did you have easy mechanisms by which you could provide feedback or participate in projects that helped to improve problems within the system? And then did you get feedback about the learning that you were going through that helped to make it better for those who came afterwards, but had some proven benefits for your work and your growth and development? Unfortunately, in many places, I think this is the intended role of the system, but the actual behavior of the system doesn't feel like that. Instead, you're left with this experience that I'm thrown into a sea of stuff that's disconnected, and I'm getting these intermittent experiences, a conference here or there, a lecture here or there, but I'm not really on a learning health journey. There doesn't seem to be any evidence that shows that these are the things that are most necessary for me to learn at this particular time. All right, so how did we go about tackling this? The idea was to spend a little time to think like, what do we understand about the problem? And that was really looking at what are the main domains that we needed to understand in order to develop something that would help us to tackle this. And part of it was knowing what we had. This was more surprisingly difficult than you might anticipate. And I would argue that this is true for every large, complicated institution, which is you've got a lot of stuff. That stuff is in websites. Sure, it's in some websites. It's in 10 to 20 websites, right? It's been sent out in emails about how people need to access it, and they're trying to sort those out. Sometimes it's in shared folders that have not always been made accessible to everybody. Sometimes they're in the library site. That was true for us as well. Not only do you have stuff, but sometimes it's not always clear who that stuff is most beneficial for. And that's what we wanted to do as we categorize things. We wanted to have a very flexible way where we could capture everything, no matter where it was. And then we could think a little bit and say, who is this most useful for, right? Because you're the ones who probably know best what the intended audience for this was. And then we knew we had to do this not just as a team within the BEI, but we had to be able to do this in a collaborative way with other people. And then we wanted to make it as quickly shareable as possible. The other domain was clear, was that every person coming through is not the same cookie cutter mold, even within residence, even within the same specialty, and that there needed to be some level of personalization. We felt that the ideal way to do this was to take advantage of some of these technologies that were allowing very intimate experiences through these personalized iPhones. But that needed you to help develop a sense of privacy together. And that requires trust, which requires you to be very explicit about the permissions. And I feel that one of the permissions that's really essential is the signal to noise ratio, the permission for me to send you something. It's not always asked within institutions, but I think it's very important to know about. And then you need to give people the ability for them to say, I no longer give you permission, and to learn something from that. The other one that we knew we had to do was to be agile, and we wanted to learn as quickly as possible from our actual users. We wanted to be curious by making sure that we still had an ongoing collaborative process with our users, even as we had sort of like a vision for what we thought we were getting to, but we wanted to be open to getting actual feedback. We wanted to be fearless, and this is one which is harder sometimes within institutions, but we wanted to face the music when things were not working. And so we wanted to use standard metrics and open communication, which we do in our monthly sessions, where we present the same data, and then we do reflections with our users. And then we wanted to be able to iterate rapidly. And so we developed the smallest useful product we could, and we tried to iterate rapidly on that. It wasn't quite as cute as this puppy, but it was a lot of fun to do. We had a vision for this of like, what could we do? And to do this minimum viable product, we wanted to just tackle the risks early. We wanted to maximize our learning and then adapt and adjust. And we'd gone through these initial phases and had just a sense of what the major purposes are. And then we wanted to build this infrastructure that let us deliver something quickly and then learn. The initial version that we anticipated was connecting our clinical trainees with all the educational resources and educational events available. That was our simple goal, right? I think we delivered that and started testing it with the medicine residency a year ago now, and then launched within the surgery department. Version 2, which is where we're now in this journey, is making learning journeys and tracking of learning easier for our clinical trainees. And we're just launching into that. And then version 3 would be that it's not just for the clinical trainees, but for learners and communities across our institutions, that everybody who joins our organization not only helps to improve themselves and their ability to provide great patient care, but grows professionally as well. And so that brings us to Sparkle. So Sparkle is actually an acronym. Despite the fact that I love saying that we help Department Sparkle, it's an acronym that stands for the single point for all resources of clinical knowledge, learning, and education. It's an entire system, but the main focus of it for most people and their main interaction with it is through the mobile app. In order to access this app, if you're within the Brigham, you would just go to the Brigham Educational Institute site and you'd look at the essential apps section, and this will describe to you how to download it. Once you've downloaded it from our internal app store, you would register with an organizational email address, and you'd be sent a magic code. The magic code will go to your email address and will then unlock the application for you. This lets us know that you're one part of our institution. And then after this step, you'll then personalize the application to yourself, telling us a little bit about who you are, what role and department you have, and then also what your interests are. With that information, we then create this curated collection for you, which is called the core collection of your initial favorites. This is what, when we've launched with the departments, these are the cards that we've worked with, say, the medicine chief residents, to understand what are the most useful cards for medicine residents to do. And we've done the same with surgery, and we're starting to launch with the other programs. You'll notice, and we talked about this in the last session, is that Brigapedia is sort of a card within the system. And that's our card for saying, how do I get stuff done in the hospital? Not only is there a main entry point for this, but because these things are so useful to clinical learners, not because they're medical learning per se, but they're essential to the practice of medicine to say, how do I get something done in the place that I am now? So we provide multiple access points to it. For example, there's a card we'll see later on, which is what are the main phone numbers inside the hospital that a clinical resident should know. We'll walk through this now just in this little video, and I'll be just sort of guiding you through what we're seeing there. Let me get this to play. Oops. All right. So this is your homepage, and here you're seeing a number of the cards that are available that you've favorited. They've come as your core collection, and you can always unfavorite them. We try to use a very simple modality. Now we're in the department view, and in the department view, this is where there are a lot more cards that we think are value to medical residents, but they're not necessarily initially favorited. And then we've got the Explore section that has all of the treasures that we know about in the Educational Institute and from all the departments that we're working with that you can go through and find, including a ton of medical education resources. And then in the Me section, you have the ability to go in and personalize and repersonalize your system, not just who you are, but also what you're interested in. And this helps to filter the search results so they're more applicable for you. You also have the ability to quickly go in and search for anything. And here we see the previous series that we did on artificial intelligence. And it has an awareness now of what all the sections are inside a series, which is the beginning of a learning journey. you not only have the ability to favorite the series, but then within the series, you're able to go in and complete any of the cards. Say you attended that conference or you reviewed it afterwards. And so now we start to have an ability for people to sort of get credit for the materials that they have and understand when they've gotten all they can out of, say, that conference series or that educational series within the system, and hopefully with a little bit of delight as well. So we've talked a little bit about sort of the events of the system in the systems language, right? We'll talk a little bit about behaviors and the data that we've learned about it. But I think it's most important for you to be able to understand a little bit about the structure, as we talked about in the systems thinking. And so that you'll understand a little bit what are the elements of Sparkle, so that if you needed to replicate some parts of it, you could. But then also so that you understand where the latent power is of the things that we could use to take real advantage of to make this even better. I'm a big fan of Math with Bad Drawings by Ben Orlin. And so in that spirit, here's your architecture with bad drawings. We started out collecting all of the materials, as I discussed, to understand where they are and then who they were most relevant for. And we did this inside this commercial system called Airtable, which is a mixture of a spreadsheet and a database. It has the power of both, and it's very easy to use and collaborate in. We use this as our robust sort of an adaptable information architecture that we've actually iterated on quite a bit within the system to help us understand and categorize all of the materials so that they're easy to find and present to users for whom they're most relevant. And then we made it available as quickly as we could through the initial widgets offered by Airtable that allowed us to show this on our website. For example, it's on the BEI website, showcasing a number of the resources that are available that people can already take advantage of. But we also knew that we wanted to make it a very personalized experience, not just the ability to go and see a database of stuff, but to get the right material to the right user. And for that, we use this robust application programming interface that Airtable makes available. Inside the Sparkle system is, of course, this own Sparkle server. And this one knows a few things. One, it knows about the user. It knows about Airtable and how to query it. It knows about security. And then it has a bunch of robot workers. And this, I think, is some of the real latent power of the system. The robot workers on our server know how to automate a bunch of stuff, including doing the secure email, including doing push notifications, checking calendars, checking for updates of any of the cards or the educational resources. And it provides us a lot of metrics, and it's wrapped in a giant security blanket so it meets enterprise level security requirements. All right, so that's the events, so like how I interact with it. We've got now the system structure, so you can sort of have a framework for understanding how it all works and what the other powers are. So how is it being used today? It's been used for over a year now, and we've been iterating a lot on it within the time. It's now in its version 1.7, which will be launching in the next week. It's already submitted to our internal store. We're using it within these highly effective programs, the medicine and the surgery programs here within the Brigham, some of the top ranked programs in the country. And they've really taken on and helped us to learn about what are the areas that it's most useful for. Some of the data that we see within the system as we've launched it is that there's a fairly rapid adoption, but there is some adoption encouragement that you need to do for people. And then it sort of gets consistently utilized, and then it consistently grows. The small areas where there's less utilization you see are the weekend days. We get information not just on who's using it, what devices they're using it, what kind of notifications they're receiving, but what kind of search terms are they using. We've also seen organic spread, which is often this marker of is something really valuable. And even though we've launched with just a few departments, we're seeing a lot of other people within the departments interact with it as they interact with people in the medicine and surgery programs. And then it's designed for interns and residents, but we're seeing a lot of other roles also utilize it, suggesting there's this latent need within these for things that Sparkle does. And then very interestingly, we get a lot of data around the specific cards that are used, how many of them are viewed, how many of the links within them are used. So we get a clear understanding of what's happening inside the system and where do we need to make improvements, what's worth focusing on and what's being underutilized. So let's just talk a little bit about what are the main uses that we see from the data and from feedback that we're getting from people within the residency. The initial big win, of course, is helping people to easily access the conferences. Before Sparkle, we help people set up calendars with notifications people could subscribe to, widgets to set up on the department website so that people could be aware of it. But this idea of push notifications to subscribable conferences has been very powerful. It's super useful and motivating to send a push notification to people to say, this is where the conference is happening, this is what the topic is, and this is what the food is. And this is often an initial big win. The other one is quick access to clinical reference tools. There are often some very big ones that most people understand, but there's a lot of fear of missing out where there are utilized resources that you only sort of stumble across well into your rotations to say like, oh yeah, that would be a useful thing, this calculator or that risk score. So having a more useful way to quickly make these available to people is important. The other one is residency logistics, the schedules and policies that are important for people to do. The MGH Whitebook has their approach to it. The Wikipedia is sort of the main interface for this. Here, there's important information for people, as we saw with the shuttles being very widely utilized, about how to get places and then how to get around within places. There's a lot related to hospital logistics, and some of the leading cards that we've seen with increased growth are things related to how do I do things inside the hospital. For example, those most common phone number extensions within it. And then there's the full text access to medical journals, which is a big win and something I discovered only late in my residency training myself. What are some of the emerging uses that we see within the system? And really, the emerging uses come really within the learning of the system itself. Initially, we're learning about adoption and helping programs to do more to help with adoption of the tool. But then it quickly moves and iterates into adaptation and innovation, right? And what are some of the adaptations and innovations that we're seeing? This week, a clinical education QI project launched within Sparkle within the medicine department, focused on improving the way that lean rounds are done for all of our resident teams in medicine. And then we're seeing a lot of clinical education and practice tools emerging that are getting new data that were very hard to do before. For example, when I was ITU attending, we created a card for the discharge checklist. And this was an evidence-based tool developed by Jeffrey Schnipper here at the Brigham that is evidence-based to help improve the discharges of patients from the hospital. We have a Sparkle card for this. You can just favorite the card when you're on the rotations. The resident will just click on the card, and then in the description are all the questions that are demonstrated to have value in asking as you're discharging a patient. And we would just use this on rounds. Not only were you using that on rounds, but we're now getting data that's showing that this card is opened this number of times. And so we can get valuable insights into which of the cards seem to be more utilized and not. And so it was of great interest to discuss this with Jeffrey Schnipper and say, hey, we could give you insights into how this is being used. Another project is launching is the Discharge Huddle, which has also been a medicine department initiative that will be launching in the next few weeks within Sparkle itself. And then the other big one that's coming up, which is this move into the version 2, is Learning Journeys, which is coming out with the new release, 1.7. And this is helping us to answer the questions which have come up again and again for us as we've worked with these amazing residency programs. Are our clinical learners participating in education events? Now, since most are hybrid, right, the idea of like who's participating is not just looking around the room, but understanding who's online, who's participated in it. And then even if they haven't participated in it, can they go back and see what all of the materials are and participate in the ones that are most relevant to them? Then can we also move from a series of individual conferences to a learning journey, something the chief residents and those who design these conferences think a lot about, but sometimes it's hard to experience that if there's no indicated relationship between each of these. They're just separate calendar events. And that's why we saw those series of cards emerge inside the system. And then can clinical learners easily receive credit for their learning? And can they build up their own learning portfolio of collected educational resources? That's what we're launching now. What are some other ways that you could do this? The alternatives you could consider, and that'll help us think a little bit more like, is this necessary? Is this overkill? What are the actual features that are unique? Right? And I think the key alternatives are these departmental websites, and especially the responsive websites. You know, the websites that also have a mobile and a desktop view. The MGH Whitebook is sort of the top one that I think about this. It has both clinical information as well as departmental information, and it is a responsive app that you can install on the homepage of your system. There's also SharePoints, and then I said the wiki, the Wikipedia only without Sparkle. Could it utilize some of these? It has some aspects that could utilize these. And then I think an emerging area that's underutilized is Teams, right? It is the ability for you to store documents. You can have a wiki-like page, and then you could have channels specifically set up that could provide notifications and updates for certain things. But it does require a lot of like joining and leaving the right kinds of channels and Teams. So in order to think about what's different from the alternatives and what are the key features that if you're going to build your own kind of system, you should consider developing something for, or combining with us to use Sparkle for a system. would be these. So not only is information really important, that's what websites often do very well, but also this ability to effectively filter and search for that. And that requires effective but flexible characterization, and especially some way to characterize things related to not just what is the educational content of this, what department, role, subject, materials of this, but what learners specifically is this most relevant for. And then you need the ability to personalize these filters and search experiences. Otherwise, people are left with this need to always go and be checking on resources to see if there have been updates or others that are specific to them. And that can be very effortful and quickly, especially during busy rotations, will fall down such that people will miss important updates. You want to make sure things are subscribable and unsubscribable, and that you're able to learn from those. I think this idea, and this is the one that we're sort of going to be proving in the next little while with the new release, is this idea that guided journeys are important, and they'll help people that are underutilized. For example, I imagine residents being able to not go to every single new conference, but then being able to go back and easily watch the lectures such that within that year, they've got a comprehensive experience from all of those educational noon conferences, which right now would be nearly impossible to do, even with the recordings being available. And then the other one is building an important learning health system. Not just as we've seen with these QI projects, an easy way to reliably reach clinical learners in a way that they give you permission to reach out to them. For example, this QI rounds project is an outreach survey that's triggered at 11 o'clock for people who've subscribed to that card, but also a way that we can develop evidence that shows what are the most engaged learning and educational resources within departments, and how can we feed that information back, and what can we use to share that information across departments. We've got other methodologies that we're developing within the Brigham Educational Institute to radically change how digital education can move towards evidence-based learning, both from looking at the medical record and people's clinical experiences and relating those to their board experiences. There's going to be more on that later, hopefully during other education innovation sessions. But I think core to this is how to build something that cooperates and provides the interesting data into a learning health system. Okay, so that's the big sort of behavioral stuff. What are the key elements that you need to consider? So how would you make your department sparkle? And really, there are only two simple key questions that you need to launch with us and to launch well. The truth is you can download it for anyone within the MGB system can download it today, but your department might not have a meaningful core collection. It'll just come with a default core collection, still with some useful things, but could be really meaningful if you launch with us. And these are the two key questions that you would need to answer. What's your core collection for people within your community in specific roles within your department? And this can be collected from anywhere in the organization. As I said in the BI, we've gone and got this giant treasures of the organization that you can take advantage of. And we've got templates from other departments now that you can use as a basis for this. The other key question is, what are the treasures that everyone in your department should know about? This is a very powerful filter where you take materials from out of the Explore section and place them into your department view so people can easily find them and then favorite them when they're interested in it, right? And then we can also, through this magic of the Airtable system, is sort and categorize them in a way that makes sense to your department. The way that they're sorted or categorized in the organizational setting is not always the same way that it should happen within your institution, and the system can handle that. Some very useful additional items that you can consider when you're launching with Sparkle is some way to describe how you get things done in your department. This has sometimes been the longest launch part for programs that really wanted this as part of their Sparkle launch. And for some of them, we've helped them get onto Brigapedia. I think for other ones, they've had their own internal wiki system or their own collaborative knowledge system. So that's sometimes the pause point in terms of like taking a little bit longer for launching Sparkle, but it's not directly related to the infrastructure for Sparkle itself, but more, how do you create a highly effective collaborative knowledge system inside your department? What could you use to make it even more useful? And this is really where we use some of the power of that ability to create robots on the server. What kind of automations would be useful? We have some default ones that can come with its ability to already check calendars and create updates, both early in the morning, so the card is updated with what the conference is, and then also 15 minutes before the event to send out a push notification, but also for announcements and celebrations across your learning communities, and then for also clinical learning reminders as we use within these QI projects. And then making sure it's useful, how would you do that? I think the part is like starting to think about what kind of learning journeys are available for your learners inside your program. These can be sequences. You should learn all of these to understand the basics of medical education, for example, are ones that we're talking about. And then current series. There are these conference series that will fit well within this. The latest conference is probably the one that you want to see, but you also want to be able to see all of the previous ones and catch up on them if necessary. We also will give you data around how effective your promotion is and the adoption, and there's important steps that need to proactively be taken there. And then we want to give you data around how we can learn and improve our system, both by giving you information about how your learners are using it, and then also which educational resources they're using most widely, and now which ones they're collecting. The most important step, of course, is just reaching out to the BEI, and then we'll figure out ways that we can be helpful in terms of helping to launch you inside the Sparkle system so that every one of your learners can have this beautifully curated collection of treasures. All right, so the learning objectives that we talked about in the beginning was empowering you to be able to describe how you could use a Sparkle app to help clinical educators and learners keep up to date on clinical conferences, tools, and all the educational treasures available within the institution. Hopefully we showed you how that happens within the Sparkle app. We talked about how the Sparkle app was developed and the benefits for this approach within healthcare innovation, and hopefully there are some pointers there at least that you could use in future projects or innovations within your organization. And then we talked about how you'd be able to plan you and your department's ability to apply the lessons learned from the Sparkle approach to improve your clinical learning environment. Thanks, everyone. I'm going to stop there and see if there are any questions or comments.
Yeah, that was great. Boy, for those of us who've been using and developing Sparkle, that was like 45 minutes of 3 years of kind of thought and process, right, that went into it. But it was great. I had 2 comments and then a question. The first comment is, especially the way you designed it and you talked about it over the course of the year, but then during this presentation, it just reminded me, and I guess I'm sharing it for reflection and to everyone else, the parallels to instructional design or curricular design as to how you can use that for technology are very real. And it leads in, and I think it's very important, right? It's a very structured way that you went into this for a purposeful endpoint, as opposed to a kind of one and done thing we purchased or, or whatnot. Which also lends me to my second reflection or comment, I guess, which is to always reflect that medical education, while it shares so many commonalities with broader educational processes, K through 12, higher education, law school, business school, name your thing, it is so uniquely different in some ways because of how we work in such an active apprenticeship model and learn by doing, especially in the GME world. And so an application like this also brings together the functional aspects that can make learning and self-discovery more efficient in many ways. So I just, second reflection. My third question goes back a little to part 1 of your series, and if people haven't seen it, they can soon see it online. And that is the question, how much self-creation by the user is valuable in this process, much like I think of a wiki page or Brigopedia or things like that, versus simply input when you're formulating something as complex and big as a structure like an application.
Wonderful reflections, Eric. Thanks. It's so nice to sort of go back. We've been talking in the details for so long, so it's like a nice opportunity for us to look back and say strategically. I do feel like this idea of building systems that are really great for undergraduate medical education, where you're in a lecture hall, are very different than apprenticeship-based education. But I haven't always seen a clear distinction between those, even though we felt like the tools, we have a CPD system that's well supported and maintained. There's a great department, there's dynamic courses, and yet it's not easy enough for me to use it on a day-to-day basis in my clinical practice. And so that's felt that separated out this idea of professional development and journey. So a wonderful reflection on that. I think that as we talk about how do we think about involvement, I think that, I'd showed a slide before of all of the data that shows that when people engage in co-creation, their investment and involvement in the system is very different. And I think, I'm always trying to, this intuitive sense is always that that there's this invisible thing, and that invisible thing is trust, right? And by putting something in there and seeing some of my own work shown back to me, my trust changes radically in the system, right? And then if somebody else collaborates on that and gives me something, helps me learn or grow, that changes it even more. We don't have that yet in the Sparkle system other than through the integration with the Brigapedia system, but it's something that's like sort of been popping up to say, like, what if we just let people add their own cards? And then we learned and shared, like once one or two people have added more than one card, we'll now give people the ability to go in and say, hey, maybe we should consider adding this to the department collection or the core collection. I do think it would change. I would say that, for those departments that haven't worked with us yet to create a core collection, their level of investment and involvement is very different. As soon as we work with the department and they stick any one of their own cards in, our engagement level with them changes quite significantly.
Well, great. As always, that was a huge amount of great information and just to think and reflect on, but also it's a real active product that for those of you who are actually within the Brigham system, please try and take advantage of. See what you think of it. We'd love the feedback. We are expanding out kind of purposefully department to department for the uniqueness of adapting to that build and what's value added. And again, our goal in the BEI is always to make what we already purchased, but also what you need more valuable to you. So it's a lot of discovery from what is needed out there, and then Narath's way of putting it together to make it highest yield. So with that, I'll thank everyone for joining today and welcome you back for one of our other future BEI events, and reach out to Narath for anything regarding the app or anything here technology at any time. So great to see everyone today. Have a great week ahead. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.